Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. This past Monday, I was honored to be invited to the launch of a new institute in Canada, launched by Frank Stronach. And Frank Stronach is a Canadian businessman that probably needs no introduction. I'll chat a little bit about his career in a minute. But first of all, I wanted to talk with him about this new institute that he's launched and what it's all about. Frank Stronach, welcome to our show.
Oh, good to be with you.
So tell me about this institute that you've launched, please.
Well, basically, I've always said, and pretty well everybody agrees, all the politicians, all the business people, and most people agree, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. You cannot feed the hungry. You cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. And so we agree on that. But to me, it's amazing we don't talk what drives the economy. The economy is driven by three forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. What I want to bring over loud and clear is workers have a moral right to some of the profits they help generate. So that's what the foundation basically will focus on. The human charter of rights would have to be fortified with an economic charter of rights. Economic charters of rights will lead to economic democracies, and economic democracies are the basis for democracy itself. In essence, we could eliminate poverty. And if you eliminate poverty, you eliminate hate, you eliminate just about everything.
So an economic charter of rights is what you're after.
Yes.
And this is an institute that you've launched. What do you want this institute to do? To raise money?
Basically, to create a grassroots movement. Okay, it's gotta be endorsed by people. Or basically, we're trying to arouse the interest of small businesses, because small businesses are the backbone of any country. And usually small business, all call it the new technologies, the new products, usually get started by small business. So, but small business is so tied up in red tape now. So I think they would appreciate it, that there's an organization where we can agree on a few basics and bring about change that the economy functions.
You talked through, I think it was 7 or 8 different issues that you wanted to be included in this economic charter of rights, and maybe after a break, we'll ask you about what some of those main issues are. But, you know, it's interesting. One of the things that you mentioned was that that employees should share in a fair portion of the economic progress. And that is something that Magna was always about, profit sharing. Tell me, where does that come from, this attitude that you've had both in this economic charter of rights, but also at Magna, that employees deserve a fair share of economic progress?
Well, it's an evolutionary process, right? When I started out, back in '57, I saved about $5,000. I rented a garage and went out hustling and went into factories. And I said, I'm very good in solving problems. If I can't solve the problems, they don't have to pay me. So after 1 month, I hired somebody. After a year, about 10 people. After 2 years, 20. And then evolution sets in. I noticed my foreman was different. So I asked him, what's the matter with you lately? And he said, look, Frank, I'm thinking of opening up my own business. I had a full understanding of that because he was the first employee I had. So I teach him everything, how a business should be run. So anyway, I said to him, look, let's talk tomorrow. Maybe we could find another answer. That evening, I was talking to myself, and I said, if that foreman's going to leave me, that would stifle my growth. Not a good idea for me. The next reason was, if that foreman's going to leave me, I would have to do all the work. I liked it even less. And the third reason was, if I do not teach a new foreman how a business is run. I still got to do all the work. So anyway, basically, I said to the foreman, I said, look, why don't you start a new factory? I said, you have a third, I have 2/3. By the end of the year, we take some profits out, with some we leave in. And he said, you mean it? And I say, yes. So we went to a lawyer right away, and we drafted up an agreement. And he worked like crazy. That was his company. So I took the next foreman, the next foreman, the next foreman, the next foreman. So, I was still a pretty young guy. I had a lot of monies coming in. I'd say, gee, business is easy. But then I saw this huge, huge market out there, the global market, right? So I came to the conclusion, besides the foreman, I really should also have the employees participating in the profit, or get a portion of the profits. And a few years later, well, it took quite a while, because I felt I should have a public company. Because if you have a private company and the worker wants to sell his shares, then the small company or company might not have the monies at that time. So anyway, I thought I should be a public company. When I put this corporate constitution in the public company, when I implemented profit sharing, our profits went up the first year 40%. The second year, 100%. The third year, 200%. So it was an amazing thing here, because when employees know they get a portion in a tangible way of the profits they generate, or the products they create and have input, and thereby they're on the front line, they can make the products better, cheaper, etc., etc. And if they get a portion, that's what drives the whole thing. So I think I came to the conclusion, like all the employees in Canada should share the profits.
So the secret is, number one, having management that shares in the profits. Number two, having employees share in the profits. In addition, you've, I think, created a situation where a lot of the different factories that you had reached a certain size, and then you didn't expand it any further. You went off and started another one. And so therefore, is there something about not small is beautiful, but maybe medium size is beautiful?
Yeah, it's, I think when you get too large, when you have too many people in one place, people become a number. But every employee wants to be recognized, that they have input and be paid accordingly to it. So I came to the conclusion about, if you go with 200 people, the manager will lose track, will not recognize or will not be able to interface with every employee. So I left it just with about factories, about 200 employees, and if a manager was quite capable, he could start a new factory and get a cut from the old factory plus a cut from the new factory. So everything, the whole thing is driven by a rewarding system.
But it was really that a certain size was the optimal size, and that
I
it got
believe
too
very
big.
strongly. I sometimes had quality efficiency experts say, look, because we had close to we had about 420 factories, and some of the efficiency experts said, look, trim it down, have fewer factories, and then you'll be more efficient. That won't be the case, because again, it's people want to be recognized. They want to be recognized if they do a good job and be rewarded. So and managers also, if a manager is responsible for one factory, he wants to be recognized. He doesn't want to be thrown in with every other manager, and so it will work a lot better.
You came in the 1950s with just a small amount of money in your pocket, and you were a tool and die expert, I understand.
Yeah, I when I was 15 years old, my mother took me by my hand. There was a big factory. I grew up in a small town, but there was a big factory there. She knew a foreman there. She went in and said, "Look," to the foreman, "I want you to teach that boy a trade." I very little did I know what that means, tool and die making. But for everything, like might it be a spoon, might it be a dashboard, might it be whatever, you need tools to make that, because nothing is made by hand. So that's a very technical trade. And so anyway, so that's what I learned. And I wanted to see the world. And I applied to visas to South Africa, the Australia, the United States, and Canada. And sometimes I'm a little tough on the Canadian bureaucracy, but I still am saying it's the best. I came first forward with the visas. I wound up in Canada with $200. That didn't last too long. You know, there were times when I was hungry in my early days. Hungry not because I wanted to lose weight. I was hungry, had no money to buy food. That leaves a very, very deep impression. And those are maybe the underlying reasons why I see the world a little different, why I say, gee, look, there's a way we can eliminate poverty. Because when you take a look in Canada, the United States, maybe 50, 60% of the family live from paycheck to paycheck. You know, the stress mothers go through and say, gee, where's the money coming next week? What food do I have to buy? So we should be more concerned and to eliminate poverty.
There's no question. How big did you grow Magna?
Well, Magna, when I kind of stepped out in 2015, we were close to 40 billion US and 170,000 employees.
40 billion, 170,000 employees, all started from you with a couple dollars in your pocket in the 1950s.
$5,000. Well, $5,000 in 57. You could buy a small farm. You could buy a small house with it, right? So it's like having maybe $300,000, $400,000, $500,000. But anyway, it wasn't a lot. And I bought a few used machines, and out I went hustling.
Fascinating story. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back in just 2 minutes with Frank Stronach and talk a little bit about this new institute that he's launched and the 7 or 8 principles that he wants to include in an economic charter of rights. Stay with us, everyone. Back in 2 minutes. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. Our guest tonight is Frank Stronach, who probably needs no introduction to anyone in Canada, but is really one of the most impressive business people that I've had the privilege of interacting with over my career. I've met Frank a few times in my career. I actually interviewed with him in the early 2000s when he was looking for someone in finance, and spent a fair amount of time with him understanding about Magna and some of the opportunities, and the company was just unbelievably impressive. You may remember, sir, that I worked with Eugene Melnick, who was also big in the racehorse business, and we ended up having a couple of conversations about what you and Eugene might be able to do with racehorses together. And that was an interesting conversation engineered by Dennis Mills at the time, who I think was one of your advisors as well. But last Monday, you were kind enough to introduce me to an institute, a new institute that you're launching. Tell us, if you could, the 7 principles of this economic Bill of Rights that you want to institute.
Okay, so basically, I'm kind of worried, right? Like I said early on, I created about over 400 factories in 34 different countries. And when we were younger, we all hustle a bit to make some money so that we can live in dignity. But in essence, I could live in over 30 countries in dignity, et cetera, but I choose Canada. Canada is a great country, so we got to be very careful that we're not defaulting. And I do have some worries, right? Because The bureaucracy is growing, inflation is growing, and when you look around buildings, any buildings going up, they are not factories, those are warehouses. And a country which imports more and more and exports less and less, the economy will break down, right? So, I think we need some changes, but you never succeed. You don't get anything done by pointing fingers whose fault it is. But we gotta implement a few economic principles. And it does not also solve when you come in with a chainsaw. In essence, I'm saying we need 7 principles to get Canada on a healthy economic footing again. One would be we got to eliminate the debt. Our debt is enormous. How can the younger generation pay that back, right? Just the interest payments alone, about approximately 150 million a day, right? And it's heaping up in such huge amounts of debt, right? That's one problem. The second problem is we gotta reduce our bureaucracy is climbing like crazy. And again, I'm not pointing the fingers to the bureaucrats. It's their fault. Right? In a civilized society, every citizen got a right to find a job, whatever the openings are. So it's the system which is at fault, but we should have a freeze. We don't have to fire, we don't have to lay off bureaucrats, but we could have a freeze, let's say, that we don't hire any new bureaucrats, right? So in 10 years, I think the bureaucracy will come down about 50%. And but that doesn't get us back, 40, 50 years ago. Right? I think the bureaucracy has climbed maybe about 200-300%. So in the golden years for business, for the people did well in Canada, was maybe 40, 50 years ago. So we got to reduce the bureaucracy. So there'll be a hiring freeze. The third principle is our tax system is so convoluted. There's thousands and thousands and thousands of regulations nobody understands. It's so the tax system's got to be black and white. It should be similar. On income, let's say 100,000 would be tax free, and for every few thousand you earn more than 100,000, the tax rate will climb. Maybe 2 or 3%, right? If you start making $1 million, the tax rate would be 50%, right? So if you pay more, you'd pay more taxes. And you need a consumption tax, right? As an example, let's say the consumption tax is 20%. If you have a Chevy and it costs $20,000, 20% would be $4,000. But let's say if you buy a Cadillac and the Cadillac costs $100,000 and the consumption tax rate is 20%, you pay $40,000, right? So the rich pay more, right? If you buy a house, whatever, if you have an expensive bottle of wine, the rich will pay more. So it should be. So we need a simplified tax system, no loopholes, and a black and white system. Fourthly, I should say, the point 4 would be we got to take the red tape off. We got to take the chains off small business. There's only 2 rules would apply: workplace safety, and you cannot dump poison chemicals in the backyard. But otherwise, have a minimum amount of bureaucracy, and small business will not pay any income tax. They pay a wage tax. And if the owner wants to take some monies, he pays the same wage taxes, whatever percentage what workers pay. But if a small business hires one employee and they pay tax, that's more monies than the small company will pay. So let's leave the small companies that they don't have to fill out huge amount of forms and paperwork. So let those entrepreneurs, let them make 50 million, let them make 100 million. That should be pure free enterprise. So where young people in Canada say, I want to achieve what XXX does, right? So if we don't do that, society cannot function. The problem with socialistic, communistic ideas is those ideas are based on wealth distribution. First, you got to create the wealth, otherwise there's nothing to distribute. And small companies will be the ideal companies. Let them operate. But when the small companies get larger, over 300 people, then they got to pay a portion of their profits to the employees. So that's the fifth. The fifth is where larger companies have to pay to their employees a portion of the profits. The sixth principle would be high school should be stopped at grade 10. Grade 11 and grade 12, our kids should learn what trades are all about. And I think this would be a win-win-win for young people. They could find out what they enjoy, where they could be good in it. And that doesn't mean they couldn't go to university 2-3 years or a few years later, right? But if they would learn a trade, then Canada, we could start making products again. And I think that's crucial. And the seventh principle is no Canadian kid should go to school hungry. That means breakfast got to be served. No Canadian kid should leave the school hungry. That means lunch has got to be served. And by law, this would have to be organic. So those are the 7 principles, nothing to do with politics, purely economic, and we could get Canada back on a sound economic foundation. And most of all, if workers can participate in profits, I think we could create an environment where we could eliminate poverty. I think that's the very key. If you eliminate poverty, eliminate hate, you eliminate just about everything.
One of the reasons why you've launched this institute and the seven economic freedoms, you say, is because you think there's a growing divide between rich and poor, rich and the working class, with more and more money being held by and made by fewer and fewer people.
It's a huge growing divide. I think about 2% in the States. I think there's more data in the States than in Canada. 2% of people, and they hold about 60% of the assets. In the Canada, it's maybe that's grown. So the divide between the rich and the working poor is growing, right? So we gotta it can't work that way. So I've always said the world has always been dominated by the golden rule and still is. I don't want to be dominated by anyone. If I feel that strong, I should not be able to dominate somebody either. Really, the question is, how can we dismantle the chains of dominations? Not via violent revolutions, only via revolutions of the mind. We need new ideas. And I bring forward new ideas. Hopefully other people bring forward new ideas. But I think it's a very simple formula, and I've always said, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work. We cannot feed the hungry. We cannot look after the most fragile people, the elderly, the sick, and the handicapped. But we got to keep talking what drives the economy. I repeat what I said early on. The economy is driven by 3 forces: smart managers, hardworking employees, and investors. All 3 have a right to the outcome, which is profits. So again, the message I want to get across, we need an economic charter of rights where those rules are laid down. And we got to make capitalists out of the workers. Okay, workers also should have the right to accumulate capital, okay, or not live from paycheck to paycheck every week. So it's a very simple model, but most of all, I've proven it with Magna, right? To build a company from scratch to 170,000 employees, because we had formulas and rules built on profit sharing, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a role model which I think Magna, I guess, has been the most successful company in the world.
Let me go through your 7 points again, if I could, and ask you a few questions. So number one is balance the budget and eliminate the national debt. We had a similar situation back in the 1990s where our debt got to unsustainable levels. Our debt and deficit right now is at levels that we haven't seen since the 1990s. And what it took at the time was a very concentrated effort to reduce public spending. And as you probably know better than I, Paul Martin, the finance minister at the time, reduced public spending by 20%. I think it was in 1995. In 1994, he tried and started the process, but in 1995, they got very serious. And 5 years later, we actually had a surplus in our budget deficit. But it took a real attitudinal change, both within the public as well as within government, to institute that kind of very drastic and very dramatic reduction in public spending. Do you think we can do that again today, a 20% reduction in public spending?
Well, I think we're so far gone up the road, right? It's enormous, right? But that's what the Economic Charter of Rights gives workers some rights and puts a discipline on the politicians, right? Because they would not be allowed to create. They must have a balanced budget. It's a must. Like every housewife knows, she cannot spend more monies than what her husband brings in, or if the husband is at home and whatever. A small household, they know they cannot spend more than what monies they have, otherwise they wind up in a poorhouse. Every farmer knows he cannot spend more monies than what he gets for his crop. The only people who do not know is the politicians. They want to be re-elected, and they promise and hand out monies, and the inflation climbs and the debt climbs. And what do we leave behind to our young kids? But we gotta turn it around. We gotta imply some sound principles.
Your second point is reduce government regulations and overhead. OECD says that we are the most regulated economy in the G7, and that approvals for whether it be housing or natural resource development, et cetera, take longer in Canada than anywhere else in the G7. Is that sustainable?
Yeah, of course. No, you won't be. Look, the same thing. I could work in the factory and I can tell if that factory makes monies or not. If there's too many office people, that factory, that company cannot be successful. It doesn't matter how hard the workers work on the factory floor. If there's too many people in the offices, they won't make any monies, and they go broke down the road. The same holds true with a country. A country where the overhead, the bureaucracy is too high, will not be. They will go broke.
Government employment has increased by something like 40% in the last several years. So there's a lot more civil servants that are regulating us today than there were in the past. There's just no question.
Well, the increases are enormous. We cannot sustain that.
Your third point is about the tax system. We have in Canada one of only 3 countries in the G7, along with France, I think it's Italy, where the top marginal tax rate is above 50%, 53%, I think it is. And yet we are also the country where it kicks in at the lowest level of income, somewhere around $200,000, while in France, it kicks in at about $1 million. So you talk about simplifying our tax system, but are the tax rates also a problem?
Well, we got to simplify the tax system. Look, when I ran Magna, I had on one hand had about 20 lawyers to my left side, and to my right hand had about 20 tax specialists. First, if I wanted to do XXX, I went to the lawyers and say, is this legal? Right? When they say that's okay, then I went to the financial people and said, look, how would the tax treatment be if I do XXX? They studied it for a week and say, well, we can't tell. It could be either way. But they're specialists down. So the specialists in downtown, they looked at it. You got a big bill, and after 2 weeks, you got a big bill, and they say it could be either or. Okay, and that's the whole tax system is that way. Okay, it gives I think it gives special treatments to the very rich.
Your number 4 is kickstart the Canadian economy by enhancing free enterprise, and you suggest doing this through eliminating the business tax for small companies. Another critique that many people have made is that the tax on capital gains and the disincentives to corporations investing in Canada is very high, such that we've got one of the lowest amounts of business investments in the G7 in Canada. Why don't businesses invest more in R&D, in building factories?
Well, business is like flows to where business get the greatest return, right? And if the tax is that high, then and the return is then the money won't stay. It will flow to different areas. So we look, if you make more money, you got to pay more tax. But the very thing is, small business are the key. There's close to 1 million small businesses in Canada. Imagine if each business would hire one employee, that would be 1 million employees more. But Canada could use a few hundred Magnas, right?
Sure could.
And that could be easily done. It's small business. We got to focus on it.
Number 6.
Get the red tape, get the chains off small business.
Number 6 is reform our educational system. Number 7 is teach our children about nutrition and provide organic food. Sir, you're in your 90s. I had the pleasure of eating at your restaurant, which serves only organic food. What's the secret to your longevity and your vibrancy in your 90s?
Well, I've been always reasonable in moderations. I didn't smoke. Well, as a kid, we all tried a little bit, but I never smoked. I've never really, if I have a meal, might it be lunch, and then I have maybe half a glass or a glass of wine nearly every day, but I can honestly say I've never been drunk. But most of all, I do try to look. As a kid, I had cornmeal 3 times a day, 7 days a week, because I come from a very poor working class family. But the corn was organic because in those days they had no chemicals. So I grew up maybe healthy. And for the last 10 years, I tried to focus to eat very healthy, to eat organic food. I decided about 10, 12 years ago to go into the farming. And the more I got into it, the more I could see this huge chemical jungle. I would say about 95% of all the foods eaten in the world comes from industrial farms. In industrial farms, you see no more eagles fly. Why? There is no more, there's no more rabbits. There's no more pheasants. We kill everything. All the pesticides, fungicides gets in the air. We breathe the air, gets in the water. We drink the water. And most of all, it gets into the soil. It gets into the food. So when you take a look, practically all the kids have allergies, and stage 2 diabetics is normally on the rise. If people would know the amount of chemicals they eat, it's unrealistic. But we gotta be. I think families, we as a country gotta see what we most stress on. We gotta see that we don't poison our kids. We gotta see, do our kids have the best chance to grow up healthy? And the best chance they have is if they don't eat chemicals. And that's why I'm saying it's so important that our kids eat organic foods. And anybody saying we can afford that, that's not an intelligent statement, because the cost, the medical cost in the billions and billions and billions. So I hope every kid should have the same chance. The richer families, they try to eat organic and their kids organic, but every kid, it doesn't matter what race, what standard they have, every kid should have the chance to eat organic food and have a chance to grow up healthy. Because if you don't grow up healthy, you won't be happy. It will hamper your learning activities, etc., etc. So I think first and foremost, we really should make an effort. What do we have to do that our kids grow up healthy and happy?
Well, I couldn't agree more. And I got to tell you, the meal that you prepared for us at Frank's, I think it's called Frank's Restaurant and Marketplace in Aurora, with kale Caesar salad and goulash and then apple strudel, all from organic food, was just excellent. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Frank Stronach. And I'm going to ask him about the car industry in just 2 minutes. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's a real pleasure and honor of mine to be chatting tonight with a hero that I've had within the Canadian business community, Frank Stronach of Magna. And he's just one of the most impressive gentlemen. In his 90s, on Monday night, he stood up for probably an hour and in front of a group of about 60 people, told us about his economic charter of rights and his brand new foundation, the Stronach Foundation that he had launched. I also had the opportunity then, sir, to ask you about the future of the car industry. Given your leading role in the Canadian automotive parts industry, you must study the car industry in great detail. What do you think is the future of the car industry? Are we all going to be driving electrical, autonomous cars in the future, or is there still a role for gas cars?
We got to go back to horse and buggies. But electric cars will play a role, but the problem is the grid system isn't there. So, and that would take many years to do. So a lot of large, the car companies which make electric cars will be losing a lot of monies because the competition be fierce, and most of all, people might not be able to drive them because the grid system isn't there. So anyway, at the time I got into it because there's a number of reasons, right? I had to go down a few times the last 2 years. What used to take me half an hour from the outer ring, from the 401 to the center of the city, now if everything's fine, it takes an hour, but it could take 2 hours. So it's not only the waiting time, the traffic jams, the inhaling of the greenhouse gases. It's just, what a waste of human energy, non-renewable energy. So I don't think you have to be a great scientist to know that we're going to be running out of gas sooner than later. I would say in about 2-3 years, gasoline will triple. I would say in 8 years, gasoline will be rationalized, will only be available for essential purposes. So the very key is how do we going to get around, right? I think small electric vehicles, it's unavoidable. That be the future.
Small electrical vehicles
will move.
Sir, you've been involved in Canadian politics. You ran for parliament at one point in time. You've been involved in Austrian politics, your birthplace, and you're now launching a foundation. You've been involved from a policy standpoint, even when you weren't running for politics. Why the significant interest in policy and politics?
Well, not politics, but look, I have a conscience. I've been blessed with a good mind and good health, and my conscience tells me, when you take a look in history, when you look back in history, all countries have basically vice councils where people had consulted people which done well for the country, etc. That's missing now, right? And so I'm saying, I have accumulated so much knowledge, right? And that should not be lost over for Canadians. And as a kid, Austria was occupied by Nazi Germany, right, with the Nazi regime. in hindsight, when I look back, I ask myself, how can that happen? And then we were occupied by the Russians. We had the communistic regime for a while. And again, it's not, those systems don't work, right? And the socialistic system don't work. They are based on wealth creation, on wealth distribution. First, you got to create the wealth, otherwise there's nothing to distribute. So we do have some problems, and I do say it doesn't matter how smart you are. If the stars are not aligned, it won't work. So life's been great to me. I've been blessed that I could provide some guidelines, and I hope to teach in universities. It's very, I've the years before I gave lectures in Harvard, right across the States, right across Canada, right across Europe, but it only occurred to me the last 2 years, what is the mandate of a university? The mandate of a university is to teach young people how can we create a more civilized society. In essence, university would be the ideal institutions where we gotta search what would be the structure of an ideal society. I think it's right there where if we haven't got a concept then there's something wrong with us. We should arrive on a concept. What would be the structure of an ideal society? So I think this is where we got to be working on it, and I think it's important that the universities they have auditoriums. They can invite very successful people, might have been in sports, in the arts, in medicine. It's really because a society needs all those inputs. But again, the key fact is, if the economy doesn't work, nothing else will work.
Sir, I thank you for your 7 points in your economic charter of rights. We've got, as we've talked about, high debt, high interest rates, high tax rates, low productivity, inflation. Are you optimistic for Canada, or are you pessimistic?
I do. Look, if you lose hope, is the most important thing. Without hope, you gotta. So I want to spread. I see. Hopefully, grassroots movement, and you gotta. Sometimes if things are very well, we let the days go by without really. But now I think the fridge is gonna get sort of somewhat empty, in most households. And this is the time when you got to reflect. This is the time when people could be made aware of, look, that we got to change the system.
And that change that you're looking for is this economic charter of rights. Anything else?
The economic charter, look, it's so obvious that workers have a right to some of the profits. It's because without workers you couldn't, you could before if you have a whip or whatever, right? But we don't want to have a society like that. But we have a society which hasn't. We have a society of bosses and workers.
Well, that's probably the biggest change that you put in place in our.
I want to have partners as the workers. I don't want to be a boss. I think every day. I think for me the most important thing was what do I have to do that the workers respect me? I think every day I ask myself the same question.
Well, you created Magna with 170,000 jobs and $1 billion and you shared more than $1 billion. You shared more than $1 billion with your workers over time, and you contributed billions of dollars to the Canadian economy. You've contributed to politics. You've contributed to philanthropy. You've contributed to horse racing, and you're now contributing with this economic charter of rights. And if you're interested in the Stronach Foundation and the Economic Charter of Rights, you can go to economiccharter.ca for more information about this foundation. Frank Stronach, thank you for the privilege of interviewing you, sir, and thank you again for the invitation to dinner on Monday night.
Brian, great at a chance to talk with you, and it takes people like you to broadcast and try to get some ideas, broaden them, so people will pick up and think, let's do something about it. Okay, thanks, Brian. We got to do it again.
I look forward to it, sir.
Okay,
we're going to take a break and come back in just 2 minutes with some of my concluding comments. Mr. Stronach, it's a pleasure, sir.
Okay, thank you.